So thank you very much and welcome everyone to this great Apollo Theatre. And my name is Richard Bowell and we begin. One of the things that this world has done that really has cost the human race is to reap the human produce, to farm the human produce far too early. And people are aiming to peak their lives ever earlier, to have early success at the cost of the whole integrated life. And what I want to show tonight, what I want to share, what I want to engage you with is something so big about this moment in our human history. And it's called integrated evolution. It's about the whole life. And there's a new language with it, and there's a new way of thinking, feeling with it, which, like anything new, it takes a little while to catch. But once you catch it, like riding a bike, you will always see things differently. This presentation is for the World Conference in Bali. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there, but I greet you all and whoever else sees this video. I've been asked by Dr. Marilyn Atkinson to provide an hour of something that really makes a difference. And being Marilyn, I took up the challenge, and now we shall get right into the heart of the matter. And I want to start it with something about this concept, but it's more than a concept, of course, that each one of us is destined to play a part in something very big in living, but because of the way we're trained, we end up playing small parts. I can remember when I became aware of this, and I really think if you try to do the things I'm talking about, don't make me the focus, make you the focus. I think if you try to do the things I'm talking about, you would discover that it's the same for you, that you have also a big part in living, but perhaps haven't discovered it. And this work helps people discover it. I once heard a wonderful saying, something to the effect that the longer it takes to find one's destiny, the greater one's destiny is. And it suggests, again, this idea that don't be too quick to sum up your life as if it's finished. We are a starter life. We're a beginning. And I'll come back to this in just a moment. Now, when did I become aware of this? Well, if this is a bus stop, and I'm 16 years old, and I leave my home in London, and as I walk to the bus stop, I feel something with me. This is language that was new to me at 16. I feel something with me. I feel as if there's a presence with me. And I arrive at the bus stop, and I stand in line, a schoolboy in his school uniform, And the bus comes along, and everyone gets on the bus, and I'm looking into the bus, and I think, I can't do this. And it even comes out of my young mouth. I can't do this. Because I know that stepping onto that bus means another day at school, means the same thing again, means a repeat. And I felt inside myself that this life was not here to repeat. And the bus conductor turned to me and said, "Last chance to get on, lad." And I said again, very quietly, "I can't do that." Off we go, ring, ring, and the bus left. I turned round, I went home, I got into my civilian clothes, I took everything from my money box, and I came back down to the bus stop on the other side of the road and took a bus to Heathrow Airport. And I took my pennies and pound notes and I said to the lady at the reservation desk, "Where can I get to for this?" And she counted my money, £55, and she said, "You can get to New York and still have £5 left over." Okay. That night I called my mother from New York. Of course I remember the phone call very well. "Mum, where are you? Are you at someone's house?" "Not exactly. I'm in New York." And then I began a journey into the unknown. Now, it doesn't matter how much a person stuffs themselves full of the known, with ice creams and hamburgers and chips and cars and criticism and judgment and gossip and small talk and stupid ideas and tiresome songs. Doesn't matter how much you stuff in here, there will forever be a place that is unpolluted, that nothing can touch, an inviolate place inside that nothing can touch. And that place is granted to human life to start afresh every day. And I took that as a challenge. In actual fact, please don't take the language to mean categorically what it says, but God gave me a challenge. A bit like Mission Impossible, God gave me a challenge. And the challenge was to try to figure out what was in that unknown and what it meant for human life. And when I figured it out, to share it with others who perhaps got on the bus and wish they hadn't. And I'm not talking about going to school. In actual fact, within 9 months of being in America, I enrolled and finished my school, and then I enrolled in university, but I did it at my choice. But there again, even when I'd done that, I sat in university, I'd enrolled in medical school. And after 1 week, I had the distinct sense that if I had to remember all this stuff, oh God, it's complex. And I really admire a doctor who is able to absorb that much knowledge over such a period of time. But after a week, I sat there and thought, no, I can't do this. I have to leave my life on reserve, available to what is the unfolding of that space. Now, the idea of space is, of course, not new. I think it was Elie Wiesel, maybe I've got the wrong name. It was certainly one of the survivors of the concentration camps who talked about there being a space between the stimulus and response. And another famous pianist, I'm sorry, my recall doesn't bring his name to mind. I think it's Arthur Schnabler said, everyone plays the same notes. It's the spaces in between that makes the difference. We know there's a space where something else can occur. I had no idea what glorious insights would occur in dedicating myself to that place on the edge of the known and the unknown. And now that I've made my research, which took 40 years, I've come back into the world and I want to say, everyone, look, I have done this research. I want to share it with you today, everywhere. This is monumental in what it means for living. You know, the world, I originated this work outwardly for the United Nations staff at UN headquarters in New York, where they're facing some of the greatest challenges in the world. And I realized so clearly that we're missing the turnaround, the shift, the important difference that we can make, that we keep talking of making. The UN talk about transforming the world. In Human Evolutionary Change, which is the name of this work, we talk about transforming oneself to then transform the world. We've developed a culture that seeks to anti-struggle. I remember with a friend one day I pointed to a washing machine and I said to him, "What's that?" He said, "It's a washing machine." I said, "No, but try and see what it is. What is it?" Because all of this work fits somewhere in the human purpose. We created these washing machines. And after a little while of trying and him thinking this is a rather strange question, I said, "What you're looking at is an anti-struggle device." Me, I'd rather walk up a set of stairs to consciously struggle than take the elevator and encourage myself away from struggle, because struggle is where the human does something very special. Against all the language that's used about us trying to find a sustainable way of life, there could be no greater folly. When did we ever let sustainability become the benchmark of living? We're not here to sustain, we're here to generate new, to create greater opportunity. As long as we think we're here to sustain, we'll always fall short. Every day is an opportunity, and now, thank you, my brain has reminded me that I said we're starter lives. Every day is a chance to encourage our life and all of our faculties forward. So what am I? I'm a purpose. And I'm a self trying to be equal to that purpose. And I am granted time and life and faculty to exercise upon all the great challenges that life faces us with. And for me, being a philosopher, because that's where I went after medical school, not that I learnt all this from school, I didn't. But for me, the greatest challenge of life is to live purposefully and meaningfully. That is the generation of our future. So come with me for this hour, and I will share with you what I know, and I hope you don't just watch this movie and say, okay, interesting. I hope you look at it again and again, even to find your own story inside that empty space. Not your story that goes, I went to university, I got a degree, I then got a PhD, I then became a CEO of a company, I then made a lot of... No, that's not the human story. That's the story, the lesser story. The great human story is what we're challenged with. Every single one of us. And I hope not to solve your problems today, but to create the biggest challenge of all, which is for human life to refine its engagement in the great purpose. wanting to say, even against my better nature, don't look at it and say, oh yeah, I've got it, yeah, well, purpose of, yeah. No. I hope you can make a copy of this, and I hope that it shows you the geography of finding that space every day. And it's called integrated evolution. And it's about the way we wire ourselves. Because right now, I'm not working to you. I'm aware, I'm very honoured that others might take an interest. I'm working to wire myself to the great purpose. I'm not talking about evolution or about integration. I am integrating myself as I talk to you. I could actually say that I don't really know what I'm going to say from 1 minute to the next. But you be the judge or the assessor as to whether it makes sense or not. I am walking along an evolutionary pathway, integrating 3 things. And let's go through them together. And if you have a copy of them with you, then try and follow it. Otherwise, watch this space. Integrated evolution, the why, the how, and the what wiring. Mostly, we ignore the why. The word why, if you say to someone why, they say, well, because. Why did you do that? Because someone told me to. Because I wanted to. Because. That's not the great why. That's the convenient why that we've put underneath what we do. So let's go through this very simply. Why is a purpose. And I'm very encouraging of my own systems to ask myself the question, for what purpose are you doing this? Have you chosen the purpose? Have you encouraged this purpose? There's a very good piece by someone called Joe Dispenza, Dr. Joe Dispenza, I think he is, a brain scientist, and it doesn't really matter, a smart guy. And he talks about how each day he starts the day with a conscious encouragement of his systems. Today I want to see a sign that something else is interested in what I'm doing. It's a very good piece. If you can find it, Joe Dispenza is his name. It's this idea that if you don't choose your purpose, if you don't actually engage, you resort to a default purpose, which is basically survival. So this is saying the higher issue, this field, if you want, of integrated, reverberating, vibrating intelligence, quantum field, all these kind of terms are describing almost like, if you could imagine, I remember once when my wife and I lived in Denmark, we lived by a lake and there was a lot of mosquitoes, and they hovered above the house and they made 2 sounds, zzz, zzz, and they just were hovering between these 2 notes. Imagine a field like that of why that we can plug into. Then the second part of this integration puzzle is oneself. You've watched me now for maybe 10 or 15 minutes. You've probably made some analysis, hopefully not a judgment, about who this person is. You've probably caught that my accent is originally English. I've got a few overlays. I've lived in America, Canada, Greece, Holland, Denmark for many years. And you've got some sense of the person. And then there's what I do. You could say I'm a lecturer, but of course that's just the outer term for something that's much bigger inside. I'm not a lecturer. I believe that I have been as I said, I've been offered a challenge to help the human race return to their core at a time where the light is close to going out. It sounds like a very big thing, and maybe you think, well, this guy is letting this go to his head. But here's my safety thinking, which is born off of this. I'm not a leader or an evolutionary leader. I think there is a leadership from evolution that I wish to be equal to. And when I'm equal to it and I give it service, it's its success. And when I don't screw it up, that's my success. The great purpose, I want it to win. I want to bring the great purpose into this world. And me, Richard, from London, the little boy who didn't get on the bus, what I did that day was to not overlay the great opportunity of life. So this is the introduction. I really encourage you to sit down with this and do something like this. You'll see this. I can't go into every aspect of it in this brief 1 hour. But you say, if I say to someone, you are a little bit argumentative, as an example, and I'm talking about someone's self, then this diagram reminds me to go up to the purpose and say, what is the purpose that your argument is serving so that I can better understand you? Which means if you want to understand the self, understand the purpose. If you want to understand the purpose through the self, understand what someone does and why, what purpose they do it for. And when you get the hang of this, you'll understand what the term integration really means. It's a phrase that's often used, but there are only 3 things. You could say, again, I'm using language because it serves to give the grandeur of the human purpose. But the temple of life has 3 pillars: the person, the purpose, and the challenge that they're faced with in living. Not 4 pillars, not 7 or 11 pillars, 3. And as you begin to integrate these 3, it's like a map. It will tune you in to that place inside yourself that is where the great purpose of living lives. It's a route away from pettiness, a route away from judgment, a route away from the small life, from the anti-struggle life, to the great purpose of life. But first of all, you have to find the way back to that place. It's the last unpolluted place on earth. In fact, that's the title of my new book. The last unpolluted place on earth is inside ourselves. If we humans are to make a change, an evolutionary change, evolution being the purpose, if we're to make a change, it has to be that that change tunes us in to its purpose. When someone is 100 kilos and they want to be 80 kilos, and they set a goal to be 80 kilos, they're making an alteration against something they perceive to be wrong. But let me show you something to lead into the next part. And it's about the fact that we humans are here to discover what is next. Now imagine, if you would, I told this plant this morning when I picked it that it was going to serve a great purpose. Imagine you're living on a planet sometime in the past, and this is all you've seen of planet life, of organic life. Stems and leaves, green stuff. Imagine that's all you've seen. And someone like me comes along and says, what do you think if this evolved one more step? Assuming that people understood the word evolved all that time ago. What do you think you would see as the next step? And you might say, well, I could imagine it bigger, maybe 10 feet tall. Okay? I could imagine that the leaves would be broad and spanning the size of a hand. You might even conceive that it changed its colour a bit. But I'm pretty sure you wouldn't describe this. This extraordinary evolution. 1,000 stamen, I think they're called. The petals, white and yellow. Heliotropic, moving towards the sun as it follows its course. So as my introduction to the next part, which is called the 3 courts of oneself, I want to suggest that we've only seen the known of the human. We have hardly seen what a human can truly do. We've only seen the known. And beyond that event horizon lies the integrated evolutionary opportunity of real change. So, take a pause, maybe chat, think about it. Don't just pass it by, and we'll start the next section in a moment. Okay, so let's now introduce, and I'll say that all of these diagrams are all templates. I love that word, templates. They're all templates about the same issue, and as you catch the language of this, they will begin to integrate. What's a template? It's different from a blueprint. A blueprint is what you need to make a Ford car. You have a map, and the result should look like the map or the blueprint diagrams that it's intended to create. An engineer can follow it and create the car, and theoretically you could take the car and reproduce the map. It's a two-way street. But the human is a template. We're a template. We're an open system. And it's what happens to the human that cannot be included in the blueprint. This is the blueprint, you could say this shape, but at core, the human is a template. So if I set off from home and go to work with the pressure I must go to work, I can calculate that from the time I leave to the time I arrive maybe is 16 minutes. And as long as there's no traffic that intervenes, I will arrive there right on time. And people live their life with schedules like this. But a template is what happens to you between the time you leave and the time you arrive. I think it was John Lennon who said, life is what happens to you while you're making plans. You see, people touch these things and, and maybe don't stop long enough and say, well, what is that? That's saying something about what we are. I'm a template, and I am conscious, which is different to aware. I'll explain that in a moment. I'm conscious that things are happening to me whilst I live. And knowing that, being conscious of it, has caused me to live in a conscious, forming way. Now, here's the diagram to introduce this idea. And it's based on the word court. Being from England, I remember seeing the courts of King Arthur in just outside London. It's around a castle. You find this idea that there are people and stations that are all there to protect something precious at the core. So it's got that kind of idea. I saw yesterday, it was a picture of an orange that had been peeled that was in a plastic container, anti-struggle device. So you can now buy an orange that's already peeled to save you time. But you see, it completely misses the concept of courts. I can remember when I was young, going to school with an orange for lunchtime. And during the morning, I would just hold it to me and smell it. It was magnificent. I mean, where does that come from? That's from the outer clothing of the orange. And then at lunchtime, peeling the orange, and there inside is this juicy, delicious fruit. And as you remove the outer courts, there's something delicious inside. And if you don't rush to the quick experience, but actually allow yourself to experience those courts condition a person to what lives inside. Don't know if you caught that. But when you give someone a present, at Christmas or for their birthday, the presents or present contains also what the person was thinking about when they wrapped it. And the person who just dives for the result, which is rather true these days because everyone has everything in certain segments of the culture, you miss the actual process of opening up to discover something of true value at the core. So this is the kind of idea that's written in here. But it is saying very definitely there are three courts. And I gave an example of the middle court or the inner court in my story of not getting on the bus. And around that is a middle court. And around that is an outer court. And this is the template of evolutionary change. This is talking about the fact that if one tries to address every challenge from one's outer court, one can never really do more than one did before. Wasn't it Einstein saying the significant problems or challenges we face cannot be solved at the same level of thinking at which we created them? I'm part of a group of people working between evolutionary consciousness and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which you may know them. They were ratified in November last year. And these goals are all expressed in terms of we must erase or eradicate poverty. We must eradicate inequality. And that's the language of the outer court. That's the outer court that is printed and wired in us by birth. We are born with a set of reactions that we then hone by experience in our first 12 years, largely, which is the period of childhood before adolescence. And we try or we react to things without needing to think about them. So I'll show this in just a moment. In the middle court is that space that we spoke about. That there's a awareness of self, that we don't have to do what has gone before. That's where it began on the bus. No, I can't. No, I won't. I had it last night, just in case you think that I'm sure you don't, proclaiming some level of perfection. That I found myself watching a television program, one of these kind of reality TV programs, and I found myself criticizing one of the people in it. And I thought, why am I doing that? And I remember quietly saying to myself, no, I won't. I won't do that. Because clearly that was the whole purpose of the program, was to encourage people to have a fiesta of reaction in their outer court. Now, it's fine to do it knowingly, to clear out your systems, just don't make it a way of life. The middle court is where we find our choice and responsibility, which is where we begin each day if we're understanding that we're a template. And the inner court is the last unpolluted place on earth. It's where nothing can live unless it is of a certain quality or character. That's why I say you can stuff yourself with all kinds of things, but there's always a redeeming part of human life, is that they're a template. I only wish that rather than calling people by their identity or nationality or even their gender, we would remind ourselves when we look at another human that we're looking at another template. It's an extraordinary proposition to train oneself to believe what really is the case. This is the challenge of our mature life. This is our adolescence, our practice ground, and this is our childhood. We are on the edge of a mature wisdom age if we can change the direction of our thinking, feeling, sentimenting, and here's how it begins. This is a description of the outer court. And it says the duality awareness of oneself, of self. And if the cameraman can just focus in nicely on the diagram, we'll see an arrow and a little round circle there, and this describes the self. And when the self looks in one direction of the arrow, down this way, it sees one thing, and when it looks that way, it sees another. So let's say, in this picture, that I'm fairly much in the middle point, but let's say this end here is about being aggressive, demanding, fighting for one's rights, and here is about being shy, reticent, letting others go first. Well, if my level of self has acquiesced or been trained to this level, then everything I see up there is more something than I am. More aggressive, more demanding, more pitching, and everything down this end is the opposite. So we make these measurements of ourself against where we have become habituated to live. But they're not real, because had myself been centered at this end, I would then be looking at shyness and reticence as opposite to myself. So we see at this level only what's available along this line of duality. You must be harder, stronger, tougher. No, you need to be more understanding, more listening. People say this to their leaders today. It's invited a kind of feedback. You need to listen more to the staff. You're too pitching. You need to be less pitching. So the leader might think, okay, maybe they got a point, or for good order in this company, I'd better show willing, so I will go and listen more to my staff. Tell me, is there anything that you would like to say about the company that you don't find yourself able to express? Oh, yes. But inside, the person might be thinking, well, I can only take so much of this because I've got to run an effective company, and they don't lead it like I do. But along here, there is no change. There's only alteration. So, in terms of the outer court, nothing can change there. In the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the Secretary General said that he wanted these goals to be ambitious up that end, because the Millennium Development Goals didn't quite do it. So let's be more ambitious. We're going to eradicate poverty totally by 2030. We're going to eradicate inequality totally by 2030. We're going to introduce laws that outlaw any reference to inequality. No one is going to be allowed to do or say anything that suggests inequality. But you cannot legislate for human greatness. You can only restrict here and get, I suppose they call it political correctness, but the question is it aligned to the great human purpose? No, it is only a level of alteration. So when someone makes a goal and says, my goal in the next 3 months is to be kinder to my children, my staff, my husband, my wife, my grandparents, the community, the world entire, it's not change. Not that there's anything wrong with it. Just as if I go on the scales and I weigh myself, oh my God, I'm 100 kilos, I need to start heading down here. What do? You go on a diet. You exercise more. But that is not a fundamental change. That's an alteration. And as we know, for most people, nothing sticks at that level. It has very little endurance. It has very little sustainability capability. So this is the outer court. Try to observe it. The greatest theatre of observing it is in oneself. If someone says something to you and you find yourself reacting by scurrying down this bar or scurrying along this bar, try to not do it. Just try to observe it. Everything I am talking about and I am sharing has come from a special kind of observation, not from books. I rarely read books, and not for the purpose of learning I don't read books. One sees this in oneself and others, and sees that this is the theatre of mutual deception. We all keep shifting along here according to the circumstance. The outer court, an introduction only. Next, the middle court. Okay, now, I feel a little bit more excited now because we're moving into the middle court, which is where our humanity is. It's where we can begin to begin. And here is the same diagram, but with a little bit of development in it. And it's called self-awareness, the open state, third vector. And you'll notice that the duality that we saw in the previous diagram, the outer court, now appears as two adjacent movements in two different directions, and we perceive it as if we're perhaps a little way up the mountain. And you can see that our self, and it's subtle, but the self here is coloured less dark than the self was before. It's less identified with our behaviour and what we do, and more identified with the sense of being an open space, a third vector. We're neither this nor this. It's neither yes nor no, black nor white, Republican or Democratic, if I dare. It's that we are a choice. And the first responsibility in choice is to have explored, to discover what something is. And this is the point being made about the flower and the plant, is that if even for one day you resisted the temptation to identify yourself with the past. I know in the work that I do, I meet many people, and the story I told about the getting on the bus came out of me in response to someone, a very charismatic gentleman that I met in a New York hotel and heard very good, profound things about. And he asked me who I was, and I took that as an invitation to talk about my middle and inner court. I didn't say I was born here, or I did this, I've got this qualification. Everything that I've done in my life has brought me to this point. And that's what's being suggested here. Try to resist one or the other. Try to be accurate to what is the human situation, which is we start right now. We're starting right now. What I did before can count in my yesterdays in the aggregate of my life. But as we search to discover what is next, what is the flowering of human life, then the future seeks to find us. Oh, but I wish I could stop on those words for an hour or more. As we seek the future seeks a future in us. This gives some huge insight into what it means to be human. We are an open template for the future to start its future in us. I'm standing about a week ago in a New York hotel elevator. And elevators are strange places because it's like being put at the same table with someone you don't know. For about 10 or 15 seconds, you're in a space that suggests you should talk because you're so close. But it has no context beyond the time that you arrive at your destination, the lobby. And I walked in, and I noticed in the corner a black man. There's an awareness one has in New York. And he was dressed very smartly, and he had a very fine bearing. And I looked at him, and he looked at me, and what I noticed is that there was no threat or no edge. And our eyes held for longer than would normally be the case in New York. And I stood by the door. The elevator arrived at the lobby, and I stepped aside, and I said, "After you." And he stopped and held the door and said, "You're a gentleman." And I said, "And I see that in you." And for a moment, he just touched the back of he touched my back. And then we both walked out. And we went about our day. I never saw him again. That was a new kind of human connection, which comes out of the inner court, but could only register in the middle court. I want you to think about a bee landing on a plant, on a flower, and that the pollen is attached to its little legs, and it goes to pollinate another flower, and the network that is formed that creates an ecology where if one is still enough and watches it, one is seeing all the unseen wires of life that evolved in that place through perhaps hundreds or thousands of years. Places that we knock down in an hour that can never restore themselves. Oh yes, you can grow some more plants, but that's not the same. And try and see that story as the way new life begins in humans. A new honesty, a new openness. It can only begin because one has, in a stable way, registered what that responsibility is to be human. And to a very large degree, as I talked about not being stupid, to a very large degree is to do with resisting duality and finding a stable point inside oneself. I don't need anyone to tell me I'm successful or clever or not clever. I draw that from serving a purpose. I prefer the language of, I see, Richard, you didn't screw it up too much. Well done. And I say, yeah, well said. That's where my life has been. To not overlay the great purpose that can be inside an elevator, on a street, in a restaurant, in a moment, any moment. If you're fortunate enough to actually work with people in facilitating them to their great purpose, which you can't do just with technique. You can only do it because you have realized it in yourself, because you have occupied this in yourself again and again. Marilyn Atkinson, we share this view very intimately, that it begins life working with others inside responsibility and choice. And that unless we center ourselves there, centering ourselves in responsibility and acting from choice, then we can't really do much to help others except at the bottom level of helping them alter behavior. A little bit about the middle court. Actually, I don't need to say everything. It's not a teaching session. Enough for you to observe the difference, enough for you to make choices, enough for you to build more of yourself in the second middle court than at the outer court. This is my daily challenge. Where, at the end of the day, have I grown myself? Not thought about it, grown myself. In doing this, I want to grow my movement away from the baseline of survival to the human new beginning of what's next. It's not a learning thing, it's a conscious contribution, a generation of a new ecology. We can't conquer inequality. I remember bringing this up at the UN. There was a poster on the wall of someone I was meeting there, and it said, "We must conquer inequality." And I said, you can't. You can only develop an ecology where such a thing as looking at another human template life and seeing them as lesser is abominable. Is something that one could not bear. How did it ever become acceptable to think of someone as being lesser? So, something on the middle court. And next, which you may say as some people often do. Yes, that's the bit I'm waiting for, the inner court. But no, it's the integration of it all that I would prefer that you caught. But the next section will be on the inner court. All right. The inner court is not 3 rooms of a house where you idly walk from one to the other. One has to see the entrance and exit points of these courts as one lives. You see, I prefer to do a not professional presentation, as it is called, and stop myself until I can find that inner court, rather than run on and saying things that I know and have heard before. Someone recently asked me a question, and I went silent, and they said, oh, well, if you haven't got anything to say about it, I'll ask someone else. I said, look, I'm just going to try and find it. I want to find it fresh for you. I don't want to come off the top of my head and tell you, you are unique in this moment as I am. And I sat for perhaps 3 minutes, and then when I began to talk to him, afterwards he said, I'm really sorry, I've just never met anyone who did that. Are we afraid of silences? Sometimes not knowing, most times not knowing, or knowing that you don't know. That's different from ignorance. Knowing that you don't know is the precursor, the pre-herald of coming to know. The journey to the inner court is one of realizing the human folly. As you can see, the self now is very removed from the baseline, and one can begin to see the comedy of life, the comedy of the way we do things and the calculations we make, and the fears that run us, and the naive way we hope to alter and exploit life. At this point, having observed oneself and neutralized the conditioning it has upon us, we feel something like the pure plasma of belonging to something more of the future than the past. I often say that belonging is the first spiritual feeling. Most people living down here have a compelling need to belong to something, an identity, a football club, a marriage, a partner, but the freedom of belonging to what's next. As I said, the first spiritual feeling that we belong by right on this planet. Every person that appeared here appears as an opportunity of self to grow the self, and we've been looking at the growth of the self, particularly in these sessions, to serve growing levels of purpose. And here we're seeing in diagram form an example of the great purpose, which is to be the conduit of new intelligence and new thinking and new teaching and new leadership and new everything. That is the very special nature of these times. And all that there is yet to do that has become confounded by this lower, it's almost like the lower ground of the Tower of Babel, this noise in the world of disagreement and conflict. To bring just one clarity into a situation is to change the situation. To bring one engagement from the high and bring it into the low. Just as the example on the elevator with that fine gentleman, that kind of simple human act of courtesy changes the whole field of what's possible, because that field, if you remember, like those mosquitoes, maybe not the best example, but that field is drawn into the activity of what one does. It becomes a conscious contribution. No conscious contribution is ever lost. With conscious contribution, you don't need to think, was it well received? Did it go down well? Did it make a difference? Conscious contribution is to know the why that the self does. To know the why. When you know why you do what you do, it draws from that inner court this extraordinary field of change, that we become the replay of a higher world. Now, this is a 1-hour presentation, and I hope that as we around the world who know about these things, that we can find the fine-tuning to look at each other and know that we're serving the same purpose, each in our different expression. I believe now at this phase in my life that my purpose is and always has been to help bring people to that inner court place. But I know others who demonstrate healing arts or leadership skills, being a family member, being a father, a mother. It can be anything. But when it brings into action that higher field of intelligence, it changes the human opportunity. It creates and generates new opportunity. We're living in an age where we can't sustain. It's too late to sustain. We're living at a time where something else is needed. And I hope that you don't miss this opportunity we have, even via video, to reaffirm to yourself, even like Marilyn, I hope you don't mind me saying, people like you and me who've been around doing these things for all of our life, that we're only ever at the beginning point. And that makes life eternally rich and new. Thank you all so much. I hope this brings together more of the purpose of our tomorrows now. Thank you.